I'm sorry. Can everyone hear my voice? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very nice. Because my boss is also here. So today I would like to use, this session will be conducted in English. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to let me know, or just feel free to reach out. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So today, because recently we also hear a lot of voice and keep asking why it's still necessary to have a WAF why we still have to conduct a security assessment even though there's a WAF in place. So I would like to talk a bit more in this topic, and then I would like to also introduce a bit different tricks and tactics that we can use during the times that we're doing some sort of assessment or penetration tests against the WAF applications. So let me quickly introduce. So before we start, sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, I can move. Yes, here you go. So before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm Kevin, not Kelvin. I know that's a mistake that was made in a website. That's fine. So right now I'm actually a cybersecurity enthusiast. So sometimes I will also do my own research during my free times. And then currently I'm working in a virtual banks. But prior to that, I also work in different companies, from government sectors to consultancy firms. And I also work in different spectrum in cybersecurity, from blue teaming side to red teaming side. And I think my certificate also proved a little bit of that, because yes, I actually took different certificates from different areas, like OSCP and OSCP from offensive security side, and GCFA for blue teaming side, and also CISP for something like the security management side. And in the past I also do my own research in my university, and there's a paper that's been submitted. So if you guys also interested in blockchain areas, you can also feel free to reach out to me. Although for now I might not very familiar with this topic. But yeah, that's pretty much me. Okay, wait a minute. So let's back to our topic. So nowadays, some of you may if you're actually working in something like the internal security teams, sometimes maybe there's some teams member who keep asking. So we already have a WAF in place. Then why we have to white this our IP address? Then why we have to white this red team IP address or the access IP address to just simply let them do their own things? Or because the WAF sometimes is very powerful, then why we still need to do something like the penetration test or application test? Because with just simple WAF in place, there's no one can break through the wall, right? But yeah, okay, I guess some of you, if you already work in this industry, you may already have a model answer. Because we have to get a multiple layer of defense. We have to have a defense in-depth approach. So we can't just simply rely on one control. We also have to ensure that every control has been in place and also have been configured properly. And that's another potential answer would be because penetration test itself is more focused on your vulnerability instead of really trying to bypass the WAF. And so that's the reason that sometimes we just keep using this reason to explain to the kind of like another teammate. But besides on that, I think that's one more point that maybe we can work to focus on is actually the WAF itself. Sometimes it's not very reliable. Although in most cases, it's definitely do their jobs. It do help us to safeguard our web applications, but it doesn't mean that it's undefeated. So, but yeah, sometimes we keep talking about the WAF can be bypassed, but there's no one to really mention why does this change that someone can actually bypass the WAF. So in the next sections, I would like to briefly talk about why it could go wrong and what we could have been done better in order to safeguard our web application and web server. So before we really jump to our next topic, let me give you guys some background about how the WAFs work. So WAF is kind of like a tool or solutions and tend to protecting your web applications. And yeah, usually WAF will be more focused on ingestion kinds of attack on preventing injection kinds of attack, such as secret injections, process scripting, and sometimes SSTI and XXC as well. But yeah, usually there are two kinds of the main method to deploy your WAF. One is the physical method. You buy an appliance from somewhere else and deploy it in the data center. And that's another way you can do is you can also leveraging some sort of cloud service. So you can also build a reverse proxy to connect your web server with the WAF. So every request that comes through that trying to reach out your web server will be first reach out to the WAF, and then the WAF will help you to pass it to your web server with their own inspection technique. So, but how does it work? But yeah, this thing I will also discuss a bit more faster. So usually WAF will work in several ways. Despite there's so many fancy methods like AI and machine learning, usually the WAF will be more focused on detecting things by regular expressions. So it's kind of like a most common method, or kind of like the foundation method that the WAF is being used for so many years, and even for now. So that's basically all the foundations that we need to know, or the background of the WAF. So next up, I would like to talk a bit more about our testing environment. In order to better show how we can actually defeat the WAF, or what is the potential way that the WAF could go wrong, I built a very simple infrastructure. So in here, I have our own web server, and it also has been established a reverse proxy connection with a WAF. Then the WAF itself has been deployed WAF securities, and it also leveraging some reverse proxy technique. So that's why every request that came from the internet will eventually come to the WAF. Then the WAF will do their own inspections and then pass it to the actual web server. So as you can see, here's the protecting website. If you guys have learned something like how we can attack the web applications, or how we can actually do some sort of secret injections, and you want to find a vulnerable site to test, usually db.a would be the famous one that you guys may have reached out before. So that's kind of like just a very buggy app and with all kinds of potential vulnerabilities. But actually, I didn't set up any sort of additional defense, and I even didn't change the difficulties of exploiting these issues, because this website can also allow you to switch to different difficulties to making some attack become slightly harder and require some tricks. But right now, even though I didn't set up any sort of defense difficulties, if you're really trying to attack the system, it will be eventually blocked by our WAF. And yeah, that's a beautiful homepage. Sorry, that's a beautiful blocking page I have made, because I run out of ideas. So this is what it is. So yeah, basically that's all the setup for the attack scenario. Let's jump to our main topic. So we have discussed how the typical WAF has been set up and how does it work. But after knowing that, why it looks quite promising, but how could it be gone wrong in several areas? So firstly, let's talk about something that's really hard to be addressed by everyone. Yes, I mean, some of you may actually, that's kind of like an endless loop, and hardly being addressed. And if you guys have seen, the WAF is mainly use regular expressions to prevent any sort of incoming web attack. That means that we're always going to be two ways to attack the WAF. One is the obfuscation attack, which is you can craft your own payload to bypass some sort of evade some sort of the regular expression detections. And another way would be not very familiar, but it's actually applicable in our WAF solutions. Which is the read DOS attack. It's kind of like abusing the regular expressions components. But before we start, because these two attacks are very reliant on regular expressions, so let us have a crash lessons on how regular expressions work. So that's the regular expressions usually looks like. it comes with a expressions with a specific rules. So by leveraging these technologies, it will be much easier to address or capture some wordings within a certain file or document, and even a request. And actually, that is also one of the core techniques that has been used by WAF for so many years, and even for now. And here's one of the example on how it works. So in here, I use a very simple expressions, A to Z, from uppercase to lowercase, and with 5 characters. By using this regular expression, it will be much easier to capture my name, Kevin, because there are 5 characters, A to Z from upper to lower, and which match all the criteria in my expressions. And that's how the actual WAF rules looks like. It looks a little bit clumsy because yes, that's the real world, and we actually trying to capture some malicious or risky attack. So, sorry. So if I really try to do something like a secret injection attack to against this against these rules, what it does is it would try to inspect my URL, and actually in reality it's gonna be the whole packet, and it will try to see whether there's a malicious byte being placed, or is there any things that may potentially match the criteria. And if it matches, that means we successfully to have a cache. And so by using this method, and that's how the real world looks like. So when I insert the malicious payload into my Bucky website, yes, it's definitely going to be blocked. But the story behind the scenes is it will also generate an alert showing that which rules has been used to block or defend my malicious request. And so that's pretty much the basic on how the WAFs work, and how the modern, even though the modern WAF as well. But knowing that when we're knowing that, it's mainly leveraging regular expressions to do their own tricks. Then what could it go wrong? So here's one of the examples. So actually, because that's very reliant on regular expressions, so that being said, with a slightly change, it could potentially bypass the whole WAF defense mechanism. So like here, in SQL world, we know or case can also equivalent to something like double things like that. But yeah, sometimes for just the tricks, we can potentially bypass a single expressions. But yeah, others, I can potentially bypass this expression. It doesn't mean that you can also bypass all the expressions, since the WAF can also have so many expressions. But it doesn't mean that it's undefeated. So that's one of the examples that how other people's actually trying to bypass a WAF with different criteria and different methods. In here, you can see there's no or case here, and there's no something like the very famous SQL wordings, except the slash and sometimes union. But yeah, usually because the WAF has been matched complex criteria or multiple criteria in order to trigger an alert and block your request. So sometimes, even though that different rule set looks promising, but it doesn't mean that it's actually undefeated. And just for information, that query also has been raised to GitHub and yeah, in the future it's actually a fix for this kind of the interesting rule set, or there's a fix for this kind of the interesting payload. And yeah, but others I know it looks scary and not much to do from our end. But actually, there are some for different WAF vendors. They do have their own rule set, and each of them may contain so many regular expressions. Like Alpha, it potentially contain like 500, and AWS WAF maybe potentially contain around 1,000 or maybe ranging around 2,000. And yeah, even though for F5 and Akamai's, the numbers is just very high. So yeah. And the example that I shows in here is just one of the regular expressions that has been used in different WAF solutions. And actually, there's so many expressions in place. But again, even though that would be quite hard to defeat, but it doesn't mean that it's immortal. Sometimes it's still, by some simple tricks, it could potentially mess up the logic and break through the wall. And the next thing I would like to talk about more is about red DOS attack. I'm sorry. So in here, what regular expression does is it will try to do some sort of the kind of like query within the strings. So actually, for every regular expression, we can change it to be something like a stage diagram. But because I don't want to make it too clumsy, so maybe I just break through it step by step, so you guys would know what's going on if your expression is monople. So let's say we have two expressions. So let's say we have expressions like bracket A plus and close bracket plus B with a weird input like A. So what it does is, because you will see this string has been matched by the first terms, so because that will be A plus, and there's a bracket here means that they have to form a group with that. So when this expression receives the input, it will try to break through it into several parts, like A to 4A's, 2A, 3A's, and for each combination, they will check whenever there's a B in place. So if there's a B, then it will stop. Then it will stop. But what if there's no B in the strings? In that case, it will try to compare different answers or compare different groups again and again. And that's why, for just simply 5 input, I can trigger this regular expression to execute so many times, like to power something. And actually, that is how the velocities looks like. If I can just simply keep going if I can keep the length become longer and longer. Although, yeah, in the beginning it doesn't seem scary because it's just kind of like 0 second and it will return the things. But if we just slightly increase a little bit for the payload, like 20 something or 30 somethings, it will be reaching sky high in terms of the performance computational times. So that's why it would be much easier to break the WAF. But some of you may ask, so if the WAF has been shut down or kind of like attacked by this kind of method, what it could be. So usually in WAF there are 2 kinds of setup. So either it will be fair codes to design any traffic directly, and in order to keep the confidentiality and integrity, because sometimes the attack may be quite deadly. It can wipe off your database. Sometimes it can also retrieve some confidential information. But yeah, the drawback is there will be no one can access your web applications. But if your WAF is going down. And yeah, there's another approach is you keep your web applications still gonna be accessible, but yeah, it will be sacrificing your confidentialities and integrity. But yeah, sometimes fail open may be a little bit better because even though the WAF was going down, if your application has been set up correctly or has a proper defense, it still means that it was still gonna be impossible to be breakthrough by secret injection or any kind of the crazy attack. But again, because neither one of the ending will be a good end, so sometimes that's also one of the things that we need to care about. And so yeah, that's the end for something that we couldn't do much about. But next up, I would be talk a bit more about misconfigurations. Usually that would be kind of like a common way that we can actually bypass a WAF, because even though you're from the attacker perspective, sometimes it's quite hard for you to really try to really create something like the very fancy regular expressions or very fancy payload to bypass this tons of the regular expression checking. Sometimes it's not very realistic within a very short period of time. But if there's a misconfiguration on your WAF, sometimes the bypass will be much more easier. So actually there are a few methods we can use. I will go through it one by one. So the first thing is, I think Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't remove this word, but it's fine. Actually, no need to modify. But it's one of the very classic example. So usually, every time when we go to the WAF, it was still required to go through our WAF application first in order to be inspected and then pass it to the web app. But what if your IP address can be directly accessed from the public? So yeah, I think you may already show the answer directly, and yeah, don't worry. I think that I have just shut it down. But yeah, sometimes you can have a try, because technically this vulnerability can only work on my computers. But yeah, on the left-hand side, we can see if we can directly access to the WAF, then yeah, definitely he can do a decent job to prevent our website under attack. But if I can directly access to your web applications, sometimes that would be quite deadly. Like I can directly do my stuff without any issues. And in fact, there are several ways that we can actually look for the origin IP address. Either by OSINT technique, we can also use census and Shodan. And both tools, sometimes it might be quite hard to work out, but for most of the time, if you actually has been an attacker or has been a pen tester, sometimes you may know this tool is quite useful, especially when you're trying to search some hidden IP address in your company. Sometimes you can also search something like the DNS history as well. And for DNS misconfigurations, because some configurations in the WAF would be more like in the production server or in the load balancer, they will use the www.abc.com. But at the end, in the web applications, they would kind of like use plot1, plot2.abc.com. And the question is, can we actually directly access this back-end domain name? And the answer is yes. That's yes. It's just gonna be fall into the same case like this. Because yeah, I know this time I actually include my real port numbers as well. But if I just simply change it to be an IP address, change it to be something like another domain, it's still gonna work out. And lastly, sometimes the TLS would also include some origin IP information. So that's why we have to stay secure, and we have to aware whenever we have put some sort of unexpected information into our TLS certificate. But yeah, it was just the things that I talk about, just kind of like a common method that most of the people already know. And the next thing I want to talk a bit more is about the bite-size exceed. I'm sorry. So actually in WAF, especially when you're using the cloud vendor, most of them are actually having some sort of limitations about the size, about how many sites they can inspect. So even though in AWS and Cloudflare and other different companies, in Cloudflare and other companies, and they do have their own limitations. So from the attacker perspective, if you can insert the byte which exceeds certain numbers of payload, that means you can actually bypass the WAF without any issues. So wait a minute. Yes. Here's some of the example on what is the actual maximum request for each majority cloud vendors. So you can see in AWS there are 8 kilobytes, and yet in Akamai it could be ranging around 8 kilobytes to 128 kilobytes. But you can see, at least from different vendor perspective, they do have their own limitations. So, but yeah, to just simply demonstrate this kind of attack, I use my own WAF instead, because I don't want to kind of like challenge every vendor. So in this example, you can see I just simply set up my byte control to 2,000 kilobytes. Sorry, 2,000 bytes. So for normal situations, if I insert a payload like that, it's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work so because it will be blocked by my WAF. But if I just simply adding a bit more about my payload, that's just gonna be possible. And actually, it actually could work in other vendors. So sometimes that's also one of the reasons we have to care about. And at the end, and that's how I can break through the walls, like perform the perform the code scripting on my buggy website. But yeah, just for your information, actually, for most of the vendor, if actually there's a request that really exceeds the WAF inspection limit, what they would do is just kind of like the two endings. One is they would drop the packet directly and say it exceeds a limit, and the second one would be we still allow the request directly can send out to the backend web server, but there will be a detection in place. So that's why, from a configuration perspective, sometimes you may differentiate what kinds of requests or what kinds of the endpoint that may potentially not that dangerous to let them through, like the upload features, because it usually contains so many bytes. So yeah, that's also one of the points that worth to concern. And lastly, there's another way we can do, which is the WAF bypass via the shared TLS. And some other people will say you can actually use the same service to bypass the same service. So the problems in here is because some cloud vendors would just blindly trust the things that in their own territories. So sometimes as an attacker, you can just simply register a service in that for this cloud vendor, and then you can leverage this technique to bypass the control and access the things that you want to go. So let's take Cloudflare as an example. So by default, when you're actually subscribing the free tier in Cloudflare, what it does, it will spin up instant for you. So actually, it's not spin up instant. It usually would be sharing a trust certificate. So what the attacker could do is he can register a custom domain on Cloudflare and then point it to a victim IP address. Then it can turn off all the security features. So by leveraging this method, when you're actually trying to send requests to your registered customer domain, it will directly go through the CDN, which is the Cloudflare, and Cloudflare would using the internal routine to pass it to the victim server. Leading this kind of attack is directly passed through the Cloudflare detection system. So that's why sometimes it's not a very good idea to blindly trust all the WAF IP address. And even though we have something like the TLS configurations, we still have to be sure that we are not existing the kind of like trust relationship, so we can ensure that all the attacks or all the requests has been come from the kind of like the trustworthy locations. And lastly, after we gone through some attacks specifically focused on the WAF, I'd like to talk about a few more things that usually WAF is quite, even for now, it's quite hard to help. So first is the IP rotations. I mean, yeah, I know in some company internal procedures, when they receive some continuous attack by the same IP address, what they would do is they would put it in the blacklist to block it. But sometimes, because in the past it used to be a very decent method to do the job, to get the job done. But right now, because we can leverage a different sort of the cloud vendor, so that would be much more easier for us to leveraging another service. The things I would like to talk about may be a bit more mess up a well-known cloud vendor. So so later on, I would like to show some techniques on how we can bypass the WAF by some well-known tool. Okay, so that is the tools that I would like to talk about, and yeah, sorry to say that. So what it does in a nutshell is it will try to leverage an AWS API gateway mechanism. So what API gateway does behind the scenes is every time when you set up a gateway like that, it will try to spin up another connections from all around the world. So by using this mechanism, it will allow you to keep changing the IP address to accessing the same website. So as a result, you can do something like this. Oh, sorry, it didn't work out. So here's one IP address. So in the left-hand side, that's the IP address. No worry, it has been changed, so it's not a big problem. But after I turn on the features, actually you can see I can keep changing my IP address randomly. But yeah, all of these are related to AWS IP, so it's fine. So okay. And here's how it works out in the real world. So as you can see, here's the backend log that I've seen in my web server. If I really trying to do something like brute force, what it does is it will keep constantly changing its IP address and also keep sending different payload. So by using this method, I can do something like the brute force attack and an API abuse attack, and that would be much easier. And even though you have set up the threshold about a rate limit, and just like if there's a certain IP address that exceeds the number of time to connecting our certain certain endpoints, it's still not gonna work out because my IPs just keep changing. So sometimes that's one of the reasons that we can't just simply rely on IP address, this information itself. Sometimes beyond the IP address, there may be several numbers or several things that we can take care of. But yeah, that's kind of like a mouse and cache game, so it's kind of endless. And lastly, because the WAF itself is mainly developed or mainly aims to protect something like the injection or dodgy requests. It's like if you see some attacks like secret addressing for the scripting or different kind of things, they usually have a very clear signature showing that it's very dodgy and you should definitely avoid it. But for some attacks that related to logical fault, like idle attacks, which is I can change my ID to accessing another resources, or if I access a certain endpoint without any sort of authentications, sometimes by using for this kind of attack, WAF can do much because just like in the human eyes, when we see that kind of request, it is kind of like similar as other normal requests, but what it does, it just kind of like mess up the logic. So I doubt that even in the future, like there's some other crazy method like machine learning or other stuff, could it really able to detect this kind of attack? And as you can see, here's actually the latest trends about different attacks. So yeah, thanks for the WAF getting more and more popular, and actually our developer is getting more and more aware on some sort of the dodgy attack. So injections is kind of like has been slowed down a little bit in the trend, but there's another things that's coming in: broken access control, cryptography failure, and insecure designs will also going to be a concern. Yeah, and please knowing that insecure designs is now part of the important things, or part of the important or critical things that should be considered in the company perspective. So at last, just want to give you some takeaways after this presentations, although it's kind of like a common sense, but still worth to mention. So first, for some issue that has hardly been solved by the WAF, that's actually not much we can do unless you're very skillful to review all these regular expressions. But what we could do as an internal security guy is we can still keep our WAF up to date. And yeah, sometimes if you're really skillful or if you want to do a bit more, you can also use different tools to help you review whether your WAF is actually in a good standard or it may still require some enhancement or uplifting. And there are two tools that you can think of. One is the Go Test WAF, help you to evaluate your WAF and score it. And the second one would be the reschool, which is a tool to detect whenever there's a possible regular expression in place. So there's possible regular expression that may potentially fall into DDoS attack. But yeah, just keep in mind, the things work out today, it doesn't mean that it can also work out tomorrow. So that's why WAF should also be under monitoring in most cases. And here, and actually, I do use one of the tools to measure my WAF. Sadly, the results not very good, but at least it's work out, right? No worry, I think if you guys really want to have a try, I can also share the domain to you. So maybe I will host maybe 1 or 2 days, see whether you guys can actually bypass my WAF. Okay, and second thing is, for those related to configuration related issues, and just keep in mind, we have to ensure that our IP address for the original IP address don't allow everyone directly access your web server by simply use the IP address. And for byte size, just keep in mind, don't blindly trust the default settings. Sometimes you have to review and see whether that's possible. It could be leveraged to bypass the WAF and break through applications. And last, not a very good idea to blindly trust the WAF and TLS, because I know some companies actually directly trust the WAF locations, but sometimes it's still worth a review because sometimes it could also be a loophole. But at the end, for some things that will not actually really hard to be addressed by the WAF, I think we have to keep the things more secure and yes, adopt some, and we also have to adopt some common good security practice during the development stage, like input validation, like ensure the input validations, authentications, and some other security design has been in place during the development stage. And yeah, I mean, sometimes DevSecOps is kind of like a buzzword in the industry, but if you have adopted, it will be much more easier for the developer to resolve if there's an issue in place. Because as always, WAF is just kind of like the WAF is just a mitigation on web's attack, but sometimes it's quite hard to. Sometimes mitigation is just kind of like lower the opportunity that the web service and attack, but sometimes it's still gonna be possible. And that's why at the end, if you already have a good applications control, or if you already adopt some good practice during the development stage, that's already doing a great job to prevent this kind of attack. But yeah, of course, adding more WAF would be adding an additional layer to safeguard your application. So that's why I want to bring this up. And at the end, if you guys may heard some other people keep asking why it's making sense to why this access the IP address and why it's still necessary to have a pen test or application test after a WAF, then maybe that would be an answer. So that's it for today, and thank you guys.